Ever wondered what history's loneliest geniuses did in their downtime? Did the world's most powerful queen have a secret obsession that no one knew about? What if the father of modern physics spent his evenings doing something truly bizarre, far from his ground-rending equations? Get ready to peek behind the curtain of history, because we are diving deep into the weirdest, most captivating hobbies of famous historical singles. And trust us, some of these might just blow your mind. Number 12. Nikola Tesla's unconventional avian friendships. Imagine the brilliant mind behind alternating current, the visionary who dreamed of wireless energy for the entire world, spending his evenings not in a lab, but meticulously caring for injured pigeons on the streets of New York City. Nikola Tesla, a man whose ideas were often centuries ahead of his time, found an unusual solace and perhaps even companionship in the company of birds. It was more than just a passing fancy. It was an intense, almost devotional practice that persisted for decades, especially after he moved into the elegant Waldorf Astoria Hotel and later the Governor Clinton Hotel. Biographers and contemporary accounts frequently detail this peculiar aspect of his life. Tesla would walk through the parks and streets, particularly around Bryant Park and the vicinity of the New York Public Library, specifically seeking out pigeon. He carried bags of seeds, sometimes even special food concoctions, and would feed them with an almost ritualistic regularity. This wasn't merely a casual scattering of crumbs. He knew many of the pigeons by sight, recognizing their individual markings and behaviors. He developed a deep attachment to them, treating them not just as animals but as intelligent beings deserving of respect and care. Eyewitnesses often reported seeing him surrounded by flocks of birds, completely engrossed in their presence, a stark contrast to his intense, often solitary intellectual pursuits. The extent of this hobby stretched beyond outdoor feeding. Tesla was known to bring injured pigeons back to his luxurious hotel rooms. He would personally nurse them back to health, fashioning splints for broken wings, administering medicine, and providing them with comfortable nesting places. One particular pigeon, a white female, became the focal point of his affection. He believed she possessed a special connection to him, describing her in almost mystical terms. Accounts from his biographers, such as Margaret Cheney and John J. O'Neill, describe how he would spend hours with this specific bird, talking to her, feeling her presence, and finding immense comfort in her company. He even claimed she would fly into his room, tapping on the window pane to alert him of her arrival. This devotion was not without its costs. His hotel bills sometimes reflected the expense of cleaning up after his feathered guests, and his eccentric behavior often raised eyebrows among hotel staff and fellow residents. Yet, Tesla remained unbothered, prioritizing the well-being of his pigeons above social norms or financial considerations. He saw no shame in his affection for these creatures. In fact, he saw it as a natural extension of his deep understanding of nature and the universe. He famously stated, "I have been feeding pigeons, thousands of them for years, but there was one, a beautiful bird, pure white, with light gray tips on its wings, that one was different. I would just have to wish and call her, and she would come flying to me." This level of personal connection, bordering on spiritual, was a profound and often misunderstood part of his private world. His biographers suggest that in a life dedicated to abstract thought and groundbreaking invention, these interactions provided a tangible emotional anchor, a quiet respite from the relentless demands of his own genius. Pigeons, in a way, were his companions in a life largely lived alone, offering unconditional affection and a simple, direct connection to the living world, a stark contrast to the complex machinery and abstract theories that consumed his professional life. Number 11. Isaac Newton's alchemical obsession and biblical chronology. Sir Isaac Newton, the towering figure of the scientific revolution, the man who gave us the laws of gravity and motion, and who revolutionized mathematics with calculus, harbored a profound and lifelong secret hobby that would seem utterly bizarre to most modern scientists: alchemy. Far from being a fringe interest, Newton dedicated more time and written output to the study of alchemy and biblical chronology than he did to physics and astronomy combined. This wasn't a casual dabbling, it was a deep, scholarly, and intensely personal pursuit, driven by a desire to understand the hidden mechanisms of the universe and the timeline of divine prophecy. His voluminous notes, kept largely secret during his lifetime, fill thousands of pages, meticulously transcribed and analyzed by scholars only centuries after his death. Newton's alchemical investigations were not about turning lead into gold in the simplistic sense often depicted in popular culture. For him, alchemy was a complex philosophical and experimental endeavor to understand the fundamental nature of matter, its transformations, and the underlying spirit or active principle that governed these changes. He saw it as a kind of proto-chemistry, but imbued with a mystical dimension. He believed that the universe was not merely a collection of inert particles, but was animated by divine forces, and that alchemy was a path to uncovering these secrets. He spent countless hours in his private laboratory at Trinity College, Cambridge, and later at his London home, experimenting with various substances, trying to distill essences, observe reactions, and record subtle changes in color, texture, and state. His notes are filled with cryptic symbols, detailed recipes for tinctures and philosophical mercury, and observations on the behavior of various metals and minerals under heat and pressure. Consulted ancient alchemical texts, many of them written in obscure Latin and filled with allegorical language, attempting to decipher their true meaning. He wasn't just following recipes. He was trying to deduce the underlying principles, to find a universal solvent or the philosopher's stone, not just for wealth, but for ultimate knowledge and longevity. Historians like Betty Jo Teeter Dobbs have meticulously documented the scale and intellectual rigor Newton applied to his alchemical work, showing how he approached it with the same systematic methodology he applied to his optical and mechanical studies. He was searching for the universal key, a theory that would unite all phenomena, both natural and spiritual. Alongside alchemy, Newton was equally engrossed in the study of biblical prophecy and chronology. He meticulously analyzed biblical texts, particularly the books of Daniel and Revelation, attempting to decipher their prophetic meaning and to establish a precise timeline of world history from creation to the apocalypse. He believed that God had embedded clues within the scriptures which, if correctly interpreted, would reveal the divine plan for humanity and the exact timing of future events. He spent years calculating the exact dates of biblical events, attempting to correlate them with historical records and astronomical observations. He wrote extensive commentaries on biblical prophecy, attempting to reconstruct the true sequence of events and to identify the various kingdoms and figures described in the prophetic visions. This was not a casual religious study. It was an intellectual pursuit of immense scale, driven by a deep conviction that knowledge of God's universe was incomplete. Without understanding its divine blueprint, he sought to harmonize natural philosophy with theology, believing that science and scripture were two complementary paths to truth. For Newton, unlocking the secrets of alchemy and the mysteries of biblical prophecy were not separate from his scientific work, but part of a larger unified quest for truth and understanding of the cosmos, both physical and spiritual. These secret hobbies reveal a side of Newton far more complex and mystical than the rationalist icon often presented, a man deeply immersed in the search for universal knowledge, guided by a fervent, almost obsessive curiosity about the hidden order of the universe and its divine origins. Number 10. Leonardo da Vinci's dissection of cadavers. Leonardo da Vinci, the Renaissance polymath, celebrated for his breathtaking artworks like the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, and his futuristic engineering designs had a hobby that was both incredibly groundbreaking and to many utterly macabre: the meticulous dissection of human cadavers. This was not a side project he dabbled in. It was a deeply engrossing, clandestine, and dangerous undertaking that spanned decades of his life, driven by an insatiable curiosity about the inner workings of the human body. He believed that to truly depict the human form in art, one must understand its every bone, muscle, nerve, and vessel from the inside out. This pursuit pushed the boundaries of art, science, and societal norms of his time. In an era when dissecting human bodies was largely forbidden by the church and considered taboo by common society, Leonardo sought out opportunities to perform these grim procedures. He operated under the cover of darkness, often in secluded locations, like hospital basements or private chambers, risking severe punishment for what was then considered desecration. His primary goal was artistic realism, to understand the mechanics of movement, the exact placement of muscles, and the intricate network of the circulatory system. However, his investigations quickly transcended artistic needs, evolving into pure scientific inquiry. He became an anatomist of unparalleled skill and observation, centuries ahead of his time. Leonardo's anatomical notebooks are a testament to the depth and detail of this hobby. They contain hundreds of exquisite drawings, illustrating muscles, bones, organs, and even the human fetus in the womb, all rendered with an accuracy that astounds modern anatomists. These drawings are not just sketches. They are complex diagrams, cross-sections, and exploded views, accompanied by detailed, mirror script notes that describe his findings. He documented everything, from the minutiae of a single nerve fiber to the complex structure of the human heart, attempting to understand its function as a pump. He even tried to understand the mechanics of the eye and the brain, attempting to map sensory pathways. He was one of the first to accurately depict the true shape of the spine, the curvature of the pelvic bone, and the musculature of the hand and arm, providing detailed schematics of how they worked in conjunction. He conducted over 30 dissections, according to some accounts, meticulously studying bodies of various ages and conditions, including those of children and pregnant women, all in pursuit of a complete understanding of human biology. These were not quick glances. They were painstaking hours, long sessions where he would carefully peel back layers of skin, muscle, and tissue, often preserving specimens in rudimentary ways to study them over extended periods. His anatomical studies directly informed his art, allowing him to render figures with an unprecedented sense of realism and dynamic naturalism. Yet, the scope of his anatomical notes suggests a scientific ambition far beyond mere artistic improvement. He intended to compile a comprehensive treatise on human anatomy, complete with illustrations and detailed descriptions, which would have been a foundational text for medicine if it had been published in his lifetime. Unfortunately, these notebooks remained largely unpublished and hidden for centuries, discovered and appreciated only much later. This secret lifelong passion for understanding the human body through direct observation and dissection reveals Leonardo not just as an artistic genius, but as a pioneering scientist whose dedication to empirical knowledge. Number 9. Queen Elizabeth I's obsessive translation of classical texts. Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, is remembered as a shrewd politician, a masterful orator, and a formidable monarch who skillfully navigated the treacherous waters of 16th century European politics. But beyond the public image of power and regal duties, Elizabeth had a deeply personal and intellectual hobby: the obsessive translation of classical texts. This was not merely a part of her royal education. It was a lifelong, passionate pursuit that showcased her formidable intellect and her dedication to scholarship, a side of her often overshadowed by her political acumen and dramatic personal life. From a young age, Elizabeth displayed an extraordinary gift for languages. Under the tutelage of prominent scholars like Roger Ascham, she mastered Latin, Greek, French, and Italian, alongside her native English. While many royals learned languages, Elizabeth went beyond mere fluency. She delved into the profound works of ancient philosophers, historians, and theologians, not just reading them, but painstakingly translating them into English, word by word, phrase by phrase. This was an arduous process that demanded not only linguistic precision, but also a deep understanding of the original author's intent and context. One of her most notable translation projects was Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy. Written in the 6th century, while its author awaited execution, this text explores themes of fate, free will, suffering, and divine providence. For a queen who faced constant political intrigue, plots against her life, and immense pressure to secure her throne, the consolation resonated deeply. Elizabeth translated the entire work, and her manuscript, written in her own hand, survives today. It reveals her meticulous attention to detail, her struggles with complex philosophical concepts, and her determination to render the nuances of the original Latin into eloquent English. Biographers like Alison Weir and historical accounts often highlight this translation as a testament to her intellectual discipline and her search for wisdom in a world full of turmoil. She also translated works by Cicero, Seneca, and other classical authors, viewing these exercises not just as academic endeavors, but as a means of personal reflection and intellectual growth. She believed that studying the wisdom of the ancients provided valuable lessons for governance and life itself. Her translations were not published for public consumption during her reign. They were private exercises, a form of intellectual discipline, and a retreat from the demanding realities of court life. This hobby allowed her to engage with profound ideas, hone her critical thinking skills, and demonstrate a profound intellectual rigor that few monarchs, male or female, possessed. This intellectual pursuit also served a subtle political purpose. In a time when women were often dismissed as intellectually inferior, Elizabeth's command of classical languages and her scholarly work quietly demonstrated her exceptional abilities. It reinforced her image as a learned monarch, a Renaissance prince in her own right, capable of ruling with wisdom and judgment. Her fluency and intellectual depth impressed foreign ambassadors and scholars, enhancing her prestige on the international stage. But at its heart, it was a personal passion, a deeply satisfying intellectual challenge that allowed her to escape into the world of ideas, to grapple with enduring questions of human existence, and to continually sharpen the formidable mind that secured her place in history as one of England's most powerful and enduring rulers. Number 9. Emily Dickinson's Private World of Pressed Flowers and Botanical Specimens. Emily Dickinson, one of America's most celebrated and enigmatic poets, lived a life largely secluded within her family home in Amherst, Massachusetts. While her ground-rending poetry, discovered mostly after her death, is her enduring legacy, she harbored a quieter, equally profound hobby that deeply informed her worldview and her art: an intense and meticulous study of botany, particularly the collection, pressing, and identification of local flora. Her herbarium, compiled during her early years, is not just a collection of dried plants but a testament to her keen observational skills, her profound connection to the natural world, and a visual metaphor for the careful, precise way she approached language and life itself. From a young age, Emily was drawn to the natural world around her home. The gardens, fields, and woods of Amherst became her primary classroom, and a source of endless fascination. Unlike many amateur botanists who simply collected specimens, Dickinson approached her botanical pursuits with a scientific rigor and an artistic sensibility. She collected plants from her family's extensive garden, from the surrounding meadows, and during her solitary walks. She then carefully pressed and mounted them, often identifying them with their Latin names. Her herbarium, preserved and later published, contains hundreds of specimens, each meticulously arranged and labeled, a silent catalog of the Amherst ecosystem as she knew it. This wasn't just a casual pastime. It was a deeply meditative and intellectual practice. She spent hours examining the delicate structures of petals, leaves, and stamens, noticing the subtle variations in color, texture, and form. This close observation trained her eye to perceive the intricate details of the world. a skill that transferred directly to her poetry, where she often used precise natural imagery to convey complex emotions. The language of flowers, their cycles of growth, bloom, and decay, became a rich source of metaphor for life, death, eternity, and the human condition. She was, in essence, a natural scientist and a poet of nature, combining empirical observation with profound introspection. For example, her poems are replete with references to specific flowers like the daisy, the rose, the orchid, and the gentian. Scholars often trace these poetic references back to the very specimens in her herbarium, suggesting a direct link between her botanical studies and her creative output. The delicate process of pressing and preserving flowers, often seen as a gentle domestic art, mirrored the way she carefully crafted and preserved her own poems, tucking them away in fascicles, private and unseen by the world for decades. Each pressed flower, frozen in time, was a small, contained universe, much like each of her precise, often unconventional poems. Her sister-in-law and close friend, Susan Huntington Gilbert Dickinson, recounted Emily's deep love for flowers and her skill in cultivating them. Emily often sent small bouquets of flowers, sometimes accompanied by a poem, to friends and family, using these botanical gifts as a form of silent communication, a way to express her thoughts and feelings from behind the veil of her increasing seclusion. Very act of nurturing life, observing its fleeting beauty, and then carefully preserving it resonated with her own struggle with the ephemeral nature of existence and her quest to capture moments of insight in verse. This quiet, persistent hobby reveals a deeper dimension to Emily Dickinson, a woman who found profound meaning and inspiration in the smallest details of the natural world, transforming them into a vibrant, living library of both scientific observation and poetic imagination. Number 8. Jane Austen's secret satires and family plays. Jane Austen, the beloved novelist who gave us witty tales of romance and social manners like Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility, is often imagined as a quiet, demure figure, penning her masterpieces in the family drawing room. While she certainly observed the polite society around her with a sharp eye, one of her lesser-known, truly quirky hobbies involved creating and performing hilarious, sometimes biting, satirical plays and poems with her family. These weren't mere childish games. They were sophisticated, often uncomfortably truthful, parodies of their neighbors, local society, and the conventions of the day, revealing a bolder, more playful, and even mischievous side to the author. Long before she became a published novelist, the Austen household was a hub of theatrical activity. Jane, along with her siblings and cousins, frequently staged amateur theatricals, often in the barn or drawing room of the rectory home in Steventon. What makes this a quirky hobby is not just the acting, but Jane's role as a principal writer and instigator of highly personalized, often cutting comedic works. These were not generic plays. They were specifically designed to poke fun at the eccentricities of people they knew, the absurdities of their social circles, and the clichés of contemporary literature. Her Surviving Juvenilia, a collection of her early writings, provides a fascinating glimpse into this hidden world. These include short stories, burlesques, and especially plays that were likely performed for their private audience. They are filled with exaggerated characters, improbable plots, and a youthful, unrestrained humor that foreshadows the subtle irony of her later novels. For instance, in The Watsons, she satirizes the social anxieties of young women seeking husbands. In her shorter pieces, she ridicules melodramatic novels and pompous declarations of love. This was a safe space for her to experiment with dialogue, character development, and comedic timing, far from the critical gaze of the public. Her sister Cassandra and her brothers were her frequent collaborators and audience. They would take on roles, often playing multiple parts, and the house would fill with laughter as Jane's sharp wit brought their social observations to life. These performances were intimate, private affairs, a form of communal entertainment that allowed the family to bond, but also served as a training ground for Jane's narrative voice and her incisive social commentary. Biographers, such as Claire Tomalin and Park Honan, frequently mentioned these theatricals as crucial to Jane's development as a writer, suggesting that the lively conversational style of her novels owes much to her early experience radians. Quirky aspect comes from the fact that these plays and poems were not meant for publication or widespread recognition. They were a private family affair, a kind of secret language of humor and observation shared among those closest to her. While her novels later achieved fame, these early private satirical works reveal a Jane Austen who was less reserved than her public image might suggest, a woman who loved to laugh, to mock pretension, and to use her brilliant mind to create entertainment that was both deeply personal and universally resonant. It was a hobby that allowed her to explore the boundaries of satire and comedy, sharpening her pen before she turned it to the masterpieces that would define her legacy, proving that even the most proper of novelists had a hidden, delightfully mischievous side. Number 7. Henry David Thoreau's meticulous calendars of nature. Henry David Thoreau, the iconic American essayist, philosopher, and naturalist, whose work Walden inspired generations to seek simplicity and connection with nature, had a hobby that was as disciplined and precise as his prose: the creation of incredibly detailed calendars of nature. This wasn't merely jotting down observations. It was a decades-long, systematic, almost obsessive project to record the exact timing of natural phenomena in his beloved Concord, Massachusetts. He aimed to document the first budding of leaves, the arrival of migratory birds, the blooming of specific flowers, the freezing and thawing of ponds, and every other subtle shift in the seasonal rhythm. This meticulous record-keeping was not just a scientific pursuit, but a deeply personal, philosophical engagement with the living world around him. Starting in his 20s and continuing for over 20 years, Thoreau filled thousands of pages in his journals with these precise observations. He didn't just note, "Spring arrived." He would record the exact date the first skunk cabbage emerged, the specific day the pond ice melted, the precise week the chestnut oak bloomed, the first sound of a peeper frog, or the first sight of a particular warbler species. He would often include the temperature, wind, direction, and other meteorological data, creating an incredibly rich database of his local environment. This required daily, often multiple times a day, excursions into the woods, fields, and along the waterways, no matter the weather. His devotion to direct observation was unparalleled. Thoreau's methods were scientific in their rigor, even if his ultimate aim was philosophical. He understood the importance of consistent data collection to discern patterns and changes over time. He was in essence conducting a long-term ecological study, documenting the phenology of his region. His journals are filled with precise measurements and descriptions, not just of what he saw, but of what he smelled, heard, and felt. He knew every plant, every animal, and every rock formation in his landscape, not as abstract categories, but as individual entities with unique stories. Biographers like Robert Gross and Laura Dasso-Walls emphasize how this practice was central to his identity and intellectual development, feeding directly into his philosophical reflections on nature and human existence. This hobby went beyond mere data collection. It was a profound act of attention and presence. By forcing himself to notice the minutiae of natural change, Thoreau cultivated a deep intimacy with his surroundings. He believed that true understanding came from direct experience and careful observation, not from abstract reasoning alone. His detailed calendars were a way of charting the pulse of the earth, of finding meaning and order in the seemingly chaotic flow of nature. They were a counterpoint to the growing industrialization and urbanization he witnessed, a deliberate choice to ground himself in the timeless rhythms of the natural world. While many might consider such detailed record-keeping tedious, for Thoreau, it was a source of immense joy and intellectual stimulation. It was a way of living deliberately, of being fully alive and attuned to the subtle messages of the natural world. These calendars of nature weren't just scientific documents. They were also a form of meditation, a pathway to deeper philosophical insights about time, change, and the interconnectedness of all life. They reveal a man who found profound meaning not in grand gestures or societal pursuits, but in the quiet, persistent act of noticing, demonstrating that even the most rigorous intellectual pursuits can stem from a deep personal passion for understanding the world in its most granular detail. Number 6. Immanuel Kant's clockwork daily routine. Immanuel Kant, the monumental German philosopher whose ideas on ethics, reason, and metaphysics fundamentally shaped modern thought, is renowned for his abstract and complex writings. But beyond his profound intellectual work, Kant possessed a hobby that was as precise and unwavering as a pendulum: his legendary, almost ritualistic daily routine. His life was so meticulously scheduled that, according to popular lore, the residents of Königsberg could set their clocks by his movements. This wasn't merely a matter of good habits. It was an extreme, almost obsessive adherence to a schedule that became a cornerstone of his existence, a philosophical practice in itself, and a quirky marvel to his contemporaries. Kant's routine began sharply at 5 a.m. He would wake up, have a cup of tea, and then immediately begin his day of writing and contemplation. His mornings were dedicated to his most intensive intellectual work, often drafting his seminal philosophical texts. After several hours of solitary study, he would hold his famous university lectures, where he would engage with students on a wide range of subjects, from philosophy and logic to geography and anthropology. His lectures were known for their clarity and engaging delivery, a testament to his disciplined preparation. At precisely 12:45 p.m., Kant would embark on his daily walk. This was no casual stroll. It was a methodical, uninterrupted constitutional that took him through the same streets of Königsberg along what became known as the Philosopher's Walk. He rarely varied his route, and he often walked alone, deep in thought. If he walked with a companion, he insisted they not talk about philosophy, preferring to discuss current events or trivial matters, perhaps as a way to clear his mind. Rain or shine, summer or winter, the walk was a non-negotiable part of his day. His strict adherence to this schedule became so famous that a common saying in Königsberg was, "It is time for Kant's walk," used as a reliable indicator of the time. After his walk, Kant would host dinner, which was the only meal of the day he shared with others. These dinners were not just about food. They were lively intellectual gatherings, often lasting for hours, where he would entertain a small group of friends and intellectual companions. He was known for his witty conversation, his breadth of knowledge, and his engaging storytelling. This social interaction was a deliberate and vital part of his routine, providing intellectual stimulation and preventing the isolation that might otherwise accompany such a rigorous solitary life. He believed that conversation was essential for sharpening the mind and fostering new ideas. His evenings were again dedicated to reading, reflection, and preparation for the next day, concluding with a final period of quiet contemplation before retiring to bed at 10 p.m. This ironclad schedule was maintained for decades, almost without deviation. Biographers like Manfred Kuhn and philosophers studying Kant often point to this routine not as a mere quirk, but as a deliberate philosophical practice. Kant believed that discipline, order, and self-control were essential for human flourishing and the pursuit of knowledge. His own life was an embodiment of his philosophical principles, a practical demonstration of the power of reason to structure one's existence. His routine was his laboratory for thought, a system designed to maximize intellectual productivity and personal well-being. It was a hobby of self-mastery, a dedication to living life with utmost precision, making his existence itself a remarkable example of controlled thought and disciplined living. Number 5. Lewis Carroll's world of intricate logic, puzzles, and word play. Lewis Carroll, the beloved author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, whose real name was Charles Lutwidge Dodgson, is known for his whimsical and nonsensical stories. Yet, behind the fantastical tales lay a mind deeply obsessed with logic, mathematics, and puzzles. His quirky hobby wasn't just writing charming children's books. It was a lifelong, passionate dedication to creating and solving intricate logic puzzles, word games, and mathematical conundrums that went far beyond mere amusement. He viewed these intellectual challenges as a serious form of play, a way to explore the boundaries of language, reason, and paradox. Dodgson was a mathematics lecturer at Christ Church, Oxford, and his academic life was steeped in the precision of logic. This rigor seeped into his recreational pursuits. He invented numerous word games, some of which are still enjoyed today. For instance, he created doublets, also known as word ladders or word links, where you transform one word into another by changing one letter at a time, with each step forming a real word. An example: turn head into tail, head; heel, teal; tall, tail. He meticulously documented these games, complete with rules and examples, often sharing them with his young friends and correspondents. But his logical pursuits went deeper. Dodgson published several books and pamphlets entirely devoted to logic puzzles and mathematical paradoxes, often under his real name. The Game of Logic, 1886, and Symbolic Logic, 1896, are not light reading. They are serious attempts to popularize and teach the principles of logic, complete with complex syllogisms presented in diagrammatic form and often framed within amusing scenarios. He believed that logic was an essential tool for clear thinking, and that engaging with puzzles could sharpen the mind. His logical puzzles were designed to challenge the reader, to expose fallacies in reasoning, and to demonstrate the power of deductive thought. His notebooks reveal countless hours spent devising new types of puzzles, from arithmetical challenges to spatial reasoning problems. He was fascinated by paradoxes, especially those that arose from language or self-reference, which often found their way into his Wonderland stories. The Mad Hatter's riddles, the Cheshire Cat's disappearing act, and the illogical arguments of the characters are all reflections of Carroll's deep engagement with logical principles and their amusing subversion. He used absurdity as a tool to highlight the underlying structure of logic, or its absence. This hobby wasn't just a leisure activity. It was an integral part of his intellectual life, a continuous exploration of the relationships between words, numbers, and ideas. He enjoyed the mental gymnastics required to construct and deconstruct a puzzle, the satisfaction of finding an elegant solution, and the joy of sharing these challenges with others. His biographers, such as Morton N. Cohen, emphasized that Dodgson's logical precision and his love for wordplay were inextricably linked to his creative genius. The same mind that could devise a complex mathematical problem could also invent a Jabberwocky or a conversation with a caterpillar, demonstrating a unique ability to bridge the worlds of rigorous logic and boundless imagination, making his intellectual games a central quirky and utterly brilliant part of his private world. Number 4. Hans Christian Andersen's obsessive paper cutouts and storytelling. Hans Christian Andersen, the Danish literary giant, famed for his timeless fairy tales like The Little Mermaid, The Ugly Duckling, and The Snow Queen, had a charmingly quirky hobby that was intrinsically linked to his storied set of paper cutouts. Wherever he traveled, and he was a prolific traveler, he carried a pair of scissors and a stack of paper. During his visits to friends, or even while performing his stories for children, he would often cut out elaborate, fantastical shapes, sometimes while simultaneously telling a tale, turning the simple act of paper cutting into a spontaneous. These were not just simple shapes. Anderson's paper cutouts were often incredibly detailed and complex, featuring scenes with castles, dancing ballerinas, intricate floral patterns, grotesque figures, swans, angels, and even self-portraits. He would fold the paper multiple times, snip away with remarkable speed and precision, and then unfurl the paper to reveal a symmetrical, often astonishingly elaborate design. The speed and dexterity with which he worked were legendary among his contemporaries. This was a form of spontaneous visual art that sprang from his fertile imagination, much like his stories. What makes this a quirky hobby is the context in which he performed it. Anderson wasn't just cutting paper for his own amusement. He often used it as a tool for engaging his audience, especially children. While recounting his latest fairy tale, or perhaps inventing one on the spot, his hands would be busy translating the whimsy of his narrative into tangible, ephemeral art. As the story unfolded, so too did the paper, culminating in a beautiful, intricate design that he would then present to his captivated listeners. It was a fusion of oral tradition, dramatic performance, and visual artistry, making the storytelling experience multisensory and truly unique. Many of his cutouts have been preserved and are now housed in museums, offering a tangible link to his creative process. They demonstrate his playful spirit, his boundless imagination, and his extraordinary skill with his hands. Scholars and biographers, including Jackie Wolschlager and Elias Bredsdorf, often highlight these cutouts as a physical manifestation of his inner world, a direct connection between his visual imagination and his narrative genius. The delicate nature of paper and the way it transformed under his quick snips mirrored the way he would transform simple words into complex narratives, and everyday observations into timeless fables. Anderson himself seemed to find immense joy and liberation in this hobby. It was a simple, accessible art form that allowed him to express himself creatively without the demands and pressures of formal writing. It was also a way for him to connect with people, particularly children, on a more immediate and playful level. In a world where his stories were often translated and performed across Europe, these spontaneous paper cuttings were a uniquely personal and intimate expression of his artistic soul. They reveal a side of the famous storyteller that was tactile, performative, and profoundly imaginative, demonstrating that even the most profound literary minds can find whimsical and captivating outlets for their creativity. Number 3. Florence Nightingale's passion for statistical diagrams and data visualization. Florence Nightingale, celebrated as the founder of modern nursing, the lady with the lamp, whose tireless work transformed healthcare, possessed a hobby that was anything but typical for a woman of her era, a fervent, almost revolutionary passion for statistics and data visualization. While her compassion for the sick and wounded is well known, her intellectual fascination with numbers, charts, and diagrams was her secret weapon, a powerful tool she wielded to expose systemic failures and advocate for radical reforms in public health. This wasn't merely a part of her work, it was a deeply ingrained intellectual pursuit, a quirky obsession that transformed complex data into compelling arguments. From a young age, Nightingale displayed an unusual aptitude and enthusiasm for mathematics, a subject typically considered unfeminine in the Victorian era. She devoured books on statistics and found numbers to be endlessly fascinating. This intellectual curiosity deepened after her experiences in the Crimean War, witnessing the horrific mortality rates among soldiers not primarily from battle wounds, but from preventable diseases due to unsanitary conditions. She realized that emotional appeals alone were insufficient. She needed undeniable proof, cold, hard facts, presented in a way that even the most resistant officials could not ignore. This is where her unique hobby truly blossomed. Nightingale became a master of statistical analysis and, more importantly, a pioneer in data visualization. She didn't just collect raw numbers on deaths and causes. She transformed them into compelling visual arguments. Her most famous innovation was the rose diagram, or coxcomb diagram, a type of polar area chart. This intricate diagram visually represented the causes of mortality among British soldiers in the Crimean War, dramatically showing that the vast majority of deaths were from preventable diseases like cholera and dysentery, represented by the large blue wedges rather than from wounds sustained in battle, the small red wedges. Her diagrams were revolutionary. Before Nightingale, data was often presented in long, dry tables, nearly impossible for busy politicians and military leaders to grasp quickly. Her visual approach made the devastating truth immediately apparent, showing the scale of unnecessary suffering and death with undeniable clarity. She used these charts as powerful tools for advocacy, presenting them to Queen Victoria, Parliament, and military commissions. She believed that statistics are the measure of God's purpose, and that by understanding and presenting data effectively, one could reveal truths and compel action. Her meticulous attention to data collection and presentation earned her the distinction of being the first female member of the Royal Statistical Society, a testament to her groundbreaking work. This passion for statistics was more than a professional tool. It was a personal intellectual pursuit driven by a deep conviction that understanding numbers was essential for social progress. It was a hobby that required immense patience, precision, and an innovative mind, transforming abstract data into vivid, undeniable truths. Florence Nightingale's quiet obsession with numbers and their visual representation reveals a brilliant strategic mind, one that understood the power of information to drive change, proving that even the most compassionate humanitarians can find their deepest calling in the seemingly dry world of data. Number 2. Michelangelo's secret sonnets and profound poetry. Michelangelo Buonarroti, the titanic figure of the Italian Renaissance, is universally revered for his monumental sculptures like David and Pietà, and his awe-inspiring frescoes in the Sistine Chapel. His public persona was that of a driven, often tormented artist, consumed by the physical demands of carving marble and painting vast ceilings. Yet, Michelangelo harbored a deeply personal and largely private hobby that few recognized during his lifetime. He was an intensely prolific and profound poet, writing hundreds of sonnets and madrigals that explored themes of love, beauty, faith, and the anguish of creation. This was not a minor distraction. It was a central secret outlet for his inner life, revealing a sensitive, philosophical, and deeply spiritual side hidden beneath his gruff exterior. Michelangelo's poetry, primarily written during his later years, served as a confidant and a profound emotional and intellectual release. Unlike his commissioned art, which was often dictated by patrons, his poetry was entirely his own, a space where he could wrestle with his deepest thoughts and feelings without external constraint. Penned around 300 sonnets and 75 madrigals, many of which were discovered and fully appreciated only centuries after his death. These poems were not published in any significant way during his lifetime. They were circulated among a very close circle of friends and admirers, notably his profound intellectual and spiritual bond with Vittoria Colonna, a noblewoman and poet herself. The themes of his poetry are often surprisingly intimate and reflective, starkly contrasting with the public grandeur of his art. He wrote extensively about his struggles as an artist, the burden of his genius, and the exhausting demands of his work. He explored the nature of beauty, often linking physical beauty to divine perfection, seeing his artistic endeavors as a way to grasp and express God's creation. Many of his sonnets are deeply spiritual, expressing his fervent Catholic faith, his search for salvation, and his understanding of the relationship between human artistic creation and divine artistry. He agonized over sin, redemption, and the path to spiritual enlightenment. Perhaps most famously, a significant portion of his poetry is dedicated to passionate expressions of platonic love, particularly for Tommaso de Cavalieri, a young nobleman whom he adored. These sonnets, often filled with intense longing and admiration, are some of the most moving love poems in the Italian language. They reveal a man capable of profound emotional attachment and a complex understanding of the nuances of human affection, transcending physical desire for a more spiritual and intellectual bond. Scholars like Robert Liebert and James M. Saslow have extensively analyzed Michelangelo's poetry, noting its literary merit and its invaluable insight into his complex psyche. This hobby was an essential counterpoint to the arduous physical labor of his public art. While he chiseled marble and painted frescoes, his mind was often composing verses, wrestling with ideas and emotions that found no direct expression in the visual arts. His poetry offers a unique window into the mind of a genius, revealing his vulnerabilities, his spiritual aspirations, and his profound capacity for introspection. It shows that even the most outwardly formidable artists find solace and expression in quiet, unexpected forms, making Michelangelo's secret life as a poet one of the most intriguing and deeply human aspects of his storied existence. Number 1. Queen Victoria's secret calligraphy and artistic scrapbooking. Queen Victoria, the formidable monarch who ruled the British Empire for over 63 years, is widely known for her stoic public image, her devotion to her husband, Prince Albert, and her profound influence on an entire era. Yet, behind the strictures of royal duty and the heavy mantle of grief after Albert's death, Victoria harbored a surprisingly delightful and deeply personal hobby, an obsessive dedication to calligraphy, illustration, and the creation of elaborate artistic scrapbooks. This wasn't merely a royal pastime, it was a lifelong, passionate pursuit that allowed her to express her creativity, document her private world, and provide a unique outlet for her personal sentiments, revealing a vibrant, artistic side often overlooked by her public persona. From a young age, Victoria displayed a keen interest in drawing and painting. She received lessons from prominent artists and developed a remarkable skill for sketching and watercolor. Her journals, which she kept meticulously throughout her life, are filled not just with her handwritten entries, but also with her own charming illustrations. These range from detailed portraits of her family and pets to whimsical depictions of everyday life at court and landscapes observed during her travels. Her artistic talent was genuine, and she pursued it with diligence and enthusiasm, often sketching scenes and people she found intriguing even during formal events. But it was her passion for scrapbooking that truly sets this hobby apart. Victoria was an avid and meticulous collector of ephemera. She didn't just paste things into a book, she created elaborate, beautifully arranged collages that were miniature works of art in themselves. These scrapbooks, many of which still exist today in the Royal Archives, contain an incredible array of items: pressed flowers, locks of hair, drawings by her children, clippings from newspapers, handwritten notes, invitations, theater programs, and even pieces of fabric. Each item was carefully chosen, meticulously arranged, and often annotated in her own elegant hand, creating a visual diary of her life, relationships, and interests. Her scrapbooking was a highly personal and private endeavor. It allowed her to commemorate significant events, preserve cherished memories, and celebrate the lives of her loved ones, especially Prince Albert. After his death, her scrapbooks became even more poignant, filled with mementos and images that reflected her profound grief and her longing for his presence. These books were not for public display, but were a way for her to process her experiences, to reflect on her life, and to connect with her emotions through a tactile and creative outlet. Quirky aspect lies in the sheer dedication and artistic flair she applied to what many might consider a simple craft. Victoria elevated scrapbooking to an art form, treating each page as a canvas where she could combine diverse elements into a cohesive and visually appealing narrative. Her meticulous calligraphy, her delicate illustrations, and her thoughtful arrangement of items reveal a woman who found deep satisfaction in the act of creation and preservation. This private hobby offers a rare glimpse into the inner world of one of history's most powerful rulers, showing that even the most formidable figures find solace and expression in quiet artistic pursuits, demonstrating a hidden creativity that shaped her private reflections and helped her navigate the immense pressures of her public life.